Would you like to accelerate your career and reach your full potential in just minutes a day? Welcome to the LEADx Show with New York Times best-selling author and Inc. 500 entrepreneur, Kevin Kruse.
Welcome back, everyone. Kevin Kruse here. This is, of course, the LEADx Leadership Show, where we're helping you to become a great boss. We're helping you to achieve your full potential at work and at home. Today on the show, I talked to a Silicon Valley venture capitalist about who he thinks are the best leaders today, why success has never been harder as an entrepreneur, and why we should get rid of office perks. Send your dogs home, he says. All right, I made that up. He didn't say that. But first, I want to read you this email from Jason. He's saying the LEADx Academy ruined his life. He said, I was a micromanaging boss that cared about the results more than the people achieving them. But I found LEADx about 3 months ago. I've been able to completely rewrite my approach to leadership and associate development and engagement. My Gallup Q12 scores went from 67 to 90. LEADx ruined my miserable life and helped me to create the life I always wanted to live and to become the leader I always wanted to be. Jason, big thanks for sending such a funny and awesome email. And for everyone else listening out there, be like Jason. Ruin your life. Go to leadx.org. You can just sign up and play around with it for 3 days. We've got Manager Essentials, a complete curriculum for new managers. We've got tons of courses for more experienced leaders. We will teach you how to achieve extreme productivity with our productivity modules, over 20 webinars, a Big 5 personality assessment so you can get true self-awareness, and we are adding more and more every month. Cool kids, be like Jason. Ruin your life at leadx.org. Our quote this week comes from Bruce Lee. A goal is not always meant to be reached. It often serves simply as something to aim at. Now, our guest today sounds like he's lived a dozen lives. This is just some of what he's accomplished. He was the co-founder of the huge software company Claris. He was the CEO for LucasArts. He was senior counsel for Apple. He was a founding director for the company Nest. I've got their Nest controllers all through my condo, and I've got cameras all throughout my home. I love the Nest products. He's written several books, including The Monk and the Riddle and Getting to Plan B. He teaches entrepreneurship at Stanford University, and he just so happens, as his day job, to be a general partner at the legendary venture capital firm Kleiner Perkins. His new book is Straight Talk for Startups, 100 Insider Rules for Beating the Odds, from mastering the fundamentals to selecting investors, fundraising, managing boards, and achieving liquidity. Our guest is Randy Komisar. Randy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, you don't know this, but when your publicity person reached out to my team and I heard Randy Komisar's got a book out and, they're doing promo for it, I said, the same one who wrote this book so many years ago? So in the bio, I mentioned you're the author of The Monk and the Riddle. And this book was really life-changing for me. I'm a serial entrepreneur now, but when it came out, I was young and less experienced. And you're not going to be able to see it through Skype, but I mean, the dog-eared pages are numerous throughout. So a big fan of your prior work and really enjoyed Straight Talk for Startups as well. So thanks for that.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate it.
So I always start with the same first question. So many of our audience members are younger managers. So what advice would you give to a first-time manager, someone who's trying to develop into a great leader?
Well, I think the first thing, if you walk into a new job, a new management role, is to understand how you're going to be judged. What does success look like? Make sure that you're clear on those things that you need to accomplish in the first 90 days, 180 days, and first year, so that you and your boss are in sync as to exactly what you need to focus on. I think the second thing is to take time and spend time with your team. Get to know your team, get to evaluate your team, but take your time. Don't try to drive to action quickly, but assess the situation, pay attention, evaluate things. I think the fourth thing you need to do is consolidate your team. Ultimately, what you want to do now, once you understand who your team is and what you need to accomplish, make sure you have the right team around you so you can succeed. I think those are the 4 steps that I recommend to any new manager.
That's great. And I'm going to shift over to your book in just a second, but I can't help myself. You know, you're really an insider in Silicon Valley. I've worked with so many greats. And are there certain CEOs who stand out in your mind as being exceptional leaders?
I think today, some of my favorites are Jeff Bezos and Reed Hastings. Jeff Bezos at Amazon, Reed Hastings at Netflix. I think they're remarkable, both in terms of their boldness and their ability to reinvent and expand their vision over time, and with the scale of what they've accomplished. I think Meg Whitman, who was responsible for leading eBay from a startup to being a great public business, and did the thankless task of reorganizing HP, is an amazing leader. I think Donna Dubinsky, who was the founder of Palm and later Handspring, and now running Numenta, a remarkable leader. But beyond the iconic leaders, I look at like the teams that I work with. These are the unheralded, the unappreciated leaders so far, but hopefully over time they will have impact. People like Marwan Fausley, who loves working with small businesses, doing transactions cross borders. He has a strong passion for that. Amal Deshpande, who is a true believer in the power and importance of farmers and is bringing them technology and the benefits of technology, particularly big data and analytics. These, I think you don't want to just look at the iconic leaders. You want to look at the leaders around you who are emerging, who are doing great work, who may not yet be celebrated, but who you can learn from.
Yeah, it's a good reminder, and it's encouraging to hear that there's great leaders all around us. It's not just the ones that are on the magazine covers. And so if we're looking for inspiration or mentorship, we might not have to look very far. So Randy, your new book again is Straight Talk for Startups, 100 Insider Rules for Beating the Odds, from mastering the fundamentals to selecting investors, fundraising, managing boards, and achieving liquidity. Very important. Now, I talked about how much I loved your book, Monk, and that's a fictionalized account and advice. And your book, Plan B, was sort of a more traditional business book. So what was your motivation for doing this book and the 100 Rules sort of style or format?
Well, my co-author, Jantoon Reigersman, and I have been having this conversation going on for years about what was going on in the boardroom and what was going on in management teams. He was a first-time CFO in a Silicon Valley company. And I would say that when he would duck his head into my office on his frequent meetings in the Kleiner Perkins offices, the conversation would generally be under the theme of, why do smart people do such dumb things? And we would have this ongoing discussion about the motivations, the objectives, the miscommunications, the opportunities for leadership. And after about 4 years, he landed that company on its belly and was looking for a new opportunity. And he came to me and said, we should write up those conversations. And those are the same sorts of conversations I have with all of my CEOs, with the people that I mentor. It's been going on for 30-something years. And the idea that we could share this more broadly, this sort of mentoring session around key topics that were coming up for everybody in the field, was powerful. Jantoon broke the mold, I think, with this format. We tried for a long time to figure out how to cover such a broad array of topics in a narrative or in a more conventional sort of, I call it call and response or case study like book. And it didn't work. It just didn't work. These chapters needed to be very insightful, short, crisp, something that people could return to over and over again for reference, that would bring them quickly up to speed and allow them to solve their own problems rather than try to impose a set of rigorous restrictions on the way in which people addressed their own challenges. And Jantoon is the guy who came up with this idea of approaching it as 100 rules, 2 to 4 pages each, that could be read in any order. They're gathered thematically, but they are not meant to be read in order. You can come back for reference. And I really loved writing in this format. It allowed me to do what I do every day, which is to have these discussions. When I wrote this book, I imagined each one of these chapters as a separate discussion with Jantoon.
Yeah, it's great. And that's exactly how it comes across. And for all of my listeners, we've had over 200 authors in just over a year. And some of the books are very theoretical and interesting in their own right. This is a great one because, as you said, whatever stage you're in your business, in your entrepreneurial journey, and I've dog-eared a lot of this, you can jump right to that section, and things are very easy to understand, very actionable, and still very powerful. So let me ask, we don't obviously have time to cover all of the rules, so some of the ones that jumped out at me. Rule number 1, right off the bat, you say starting a venture has never been easier, but succeeding has never been harder. So tell me about that.
Well, in today's market, there's a surplus of capital, not necessarily in all startup markets, but certainly in the large startup markets. And there's more capital in all the markets than there probably has been in decades, maybe ever.
Yeah.
So the reality is that it's not that hard to go off and raise a little amount of capital to test a new idea. It's a lot cheaper to bring those ideas to market, to understand how consumers or customers are going to respond to those ideas. So money's more available and it's cheaper to test them. The problem is that money's more available and it's cheaper to test everybody's ideas. So there's a plethora of ideas out there, and they're crowding each market, forcing what I call really perverse behaviors, because each market now finds the leaders spending capital in what I call uneconomic ways, meaning ways that aren't going to lead to a profit, in order to try to establish dominance. And once one company does it in a sector, all the companies need to do it in the sector to keep up. And so you end up with these perverse behaviors that aren't good for entrepreneurs, they're not good for investors, they're not good for customers, and it makes it very, very difficult to succeed because you're having to do things that aren't business-like in order to rise to the top.
Now, as a follow-up, I mean, this is kind of tough, but in these markets where people are buying customers and doing uneconomic things, the advantage goes to the company that's raised the most money. It almost becomes a cash arms race. So what advice would you have for someone who maybe is not in that lead position? Wow, my competitors have much deeper pockets to spend in this area. They're doing stupid things in the market. How would you try to compete against that?
Well, you have to understand that the first mover advantage is not always an advantage. The reality is that the second player in a market oftentimes gets it right by learning from the mistakes of the first party in the marketplace. And I think that if you take a look, for instance, at Lyft and Uber right now, Lyft is gaining on Uber much more quickly than Uber is growing today. And Uber's gone off and made a bunch of billion-dollar blunders in the process of spending inordinate amounts of capital to try to dominate markets far beyond what its target market was. And in the process, Lyft has kept to its knitting, continue to grow its business in a methodical way, satisfy customers, satisfy their drivers. And so you begin to see that it is quite possible to be the second in a market and still be able to compete against the first.
Yeah, that's a great example. Rule 14 is instead of free lunch, provide meaningful work. Tell us about that one.
Well, in Silicon Valley now, it's so difficult to recruit people and retain people that the perks are really outlandish. It's not just free lunches. It's free dry cleaning. It's free pet insurance. It's everything you can imagine to make the lives of these workers easier, to keep them wedded to your business and keep them from going on LinkedIn and finding the next job. So I think that in Silicon Valley, again, is doing something that is not good for business, because what employees really want more than anything is to be challenged and to have a sense of purpose, to have the opportunity to develop their skills and grow, to be paid fairly and have future opportunities to advance. That's what they really want. And if you give them great work and a sense of purpose, then you can win the hearts and minds of your people without having to lavish them with absurd perks in order to try to keep them in the seat.
That's great. Keep the focus on the purpose and the challenging work, the type of work. Rule 32, you characterize 5 different types of investors. So I'm curious, what type of investor are you? And is this you personally or the firm?
Well, I think all firms are made up of a different array of investors.
Okay.
I think if you take a look at the biggest firms, the best firms, you'll see representatives of many of the different types that I talk about in the book. And I talk about thematic investors, investors who have a view of the future, a theme that they invest in. They look for their keys under the lights, so to speak, looking for projects that meet those themes. There are domain experts who invest in areas that they know well and only those areas that know well. There are quant investors. These are usually now younger investors who are taking advantage of all of the early data on growth and inflections that allow them to get a better sense of which businesses are developing. They look strictly at the numbers. There's people investors, and there's what I call growth investors, later stage investors. I'm a people investor. I always have been. I think from my standpoint, frankly, I'm not smart enough to be a thematic investor. I've been in the business long enough that domains have changed. So I started off as a domain investor, but frankly, if you're going to be in this business for a lifetime, a career, you're going to have to change your domains because the market's always changing. So the only thing that I can hold on to is an evaluation, understanding of what it takes to be a great entrepreneur and a great business leader, and to look for that in the people that I invest in. Makes
a lot of sense. You have great advice and very specific advice about raising money, raising capital. And I'm curious, I've got a lot of younger listeners out there to the LEADx show, and I'm sure there's some who are saying, well, this is great if I was already in Silicon Valley, already connected, but I don't know any venture capitalists. Do you cold call them? How do you get connected? So for those who aren't sort of already in the community, what would be your advice to someone who's got the dream, maybe even the skill set, but really no connections to capital?
I'd take a step back, actually. The first thing is, do you actually need venture capital? One of our rules is don't take venture capital unless you absolutely need it. That may sound ironic coming from somebody who works with a venture capital firm, but I think that venture capital doesn't serve all entrepreneurs, and it certainly doesn't serve all stages of entrepreneurship the same. So I do believe that if you can raise money from friends and family or from advances from customers in order to test your ideas out, that's usually a better approach than trying to raise institutional money too early. I also think that it's important to to break your ideas into bite-sized pieces, to stage your investment so that you are focusing on the white-heart risks and assumptions that are key to your analysis early on, and proving them out as cheaply and as quickly as possible. And refining your business. I call that dashboarding. It came from the Getting to Plan B book. Dashboarding your business so that you are quickly removing risk, testing assumptions, and increasing the value of your idea along the way, and can determine later whether it's appropriate for institutional investors or not. I also think that you really do need to step all the way back and ask yourself what we call the cardinal rule. And the cardinal rule is, why are you doing this? Why you? Why now? Why this? And if you can't answer those questions in a compelling way for yourself, then you're not ready to answer those questions for an investor.
That's fantastic. Thoughts on incubators as a place for some people to get started?
Well, I think it really depends on the location, frankly. I think a place like Silicon Valley is an incubator. The whole place is an incubator. And so when you look at the incubators in Silicon Valley, the role that they play by and large is as a feeder into the ecosystem of investors. They don't really help you build your business. That's not their job. They don't work with you long enough to do that. They work with you long enough to help you refine your idea and pitch so that you can find investors. On the other hand, if you go to markets that are underserved, if you go to markets certainly abroad or in the middle of the country that are underserved, incubators can be safe havens for entrepreneurs to share ideas, to weather the storm, right, to share information and contacts. And they become critical to building a medium by which these entrepreneurs can survive and be viable in these secondary markets.
Love it. Great perspective. Randy, I want to thank you for coming on to the show. How can our listeners find out more about you and your new book?
Well, Straight Talk for Startups, nospaces.com will give you information about the book. You can find out about me at the Kleiner Perkins Caulfield and Byers or KPCB.com website, or also just go to Amazon and you can see any one of my books in actually a very complete bio that I include as well.
Fantastic. We will include those links in the show notes and, of course, the articles that come from this conversation. Randy, thanks again for coming on to the show.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Friends, if you like this episode of the LEADx Leadership Podcast, please take just a minute and leave a rating on iTunes or Stitcher. It's the #1 way we will attract new leaders. And you know, I'm on a mission over the next 10 years to spark 100 million new leaders. And if you're looking to teach your managers how to become great leaders, how to increase their employee engagement scores, and how they can achieve extreme productivity, check out the LEADx Academy at leadx.org, or just send me an email if you have 10 or more managers, and we'll talk about doing a free pilot in your company. info@leadx.org is the email address, and I'll personally respond. Remember, leadership is influence. You are always leading. How will you lead today?